Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, my apologies for the delay. Given the delay, I'll go straight into the slide presentation. I just wanted to set the scene by, in fact, just giving you some key factors in respect of the economy, the Fijian economy, where we're positioned at the moment, what are the key determinants that actually drive government policy, and what is the future like. So, just going on to the first slide. Maybe I'll point it.
I'll just click. You can use the pointer.
Okay, the first slide, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start off with that. Okay, economic growth. As you can see that we have been growing, as we've said, for the past 8 years, unprecedented consecutive growth. This actually never happened in Fijian history. It's happened about twice, where we've had about 7 years of growth. One is post-independence in the early 70s and one in the 1990s, where we had a spate of growth of about 7 years. We've now got 7 years of straight growth, and of course projected out to 2018, 2019 too, we expect these levels of growth. Of course, we had Cyclone Winston here, where the growth in fact came down. The projected growth was in excess of 3%. However, as you know, the cyclones kill lives. It actually stagnates growth. Generally, you go into a negative growth, as you see over here, when we had Nick and a couple other events. But we were fortunate enough that it continued to grow at least 2%, although slightly dampened. But the reality is that because we were able to make some early interventions into the economy, the growth continued to grow. So things like the FNPF withdrawals, things like the Health for Homes initiative actually projected that level of cash into the economy to keep people to actually spend. So it was predominantly consumer-led growth for that period. And of course, the base for the growth for the preceding years was actually quite strong. So, should we just go back? Unemployment, of course, as you know, the latest figures have come out. It's been the lowest in the past 15 years, which is 5.5%, which is actually a pretty good position. Of course, you want to continuously reduce that further. But the interesting thing is, of course, that youth unemployment is higher than 5.5%. So overall, for the economy, the national unemployment rate has dropped. But youth unemployment is higher than that. There's some debate about, in fact, we're talking to the Bureau of Statistics as to how do they actually measure unemployment for youth. Do they simply go out on the street and say somebody between the age of 17 and 24 and say, are you working or not? If they say no, are they measuring them as unemployed? Because maybe they're university, maybe studying part-time in university, maybe they're working for their family, whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, notwithstanding those slight anomalies, the reality is that youth unemployment is slightly higher than the 5.5%. And therefore, things like retirement age of civil servants is 55 is actually quite significant, because it helps bring the younger people into the workforce. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, 69.4% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. So I'm in the minority. Those who are below the age of 40 are in the majority. This is why it's very critical to, in fact, ensure that we invest in the young people, not just simply by giving them employment opportunities, but those of them who are actually below, or at school age, I should say, that we're able to provide them a learning environment for them, and also in terms of access to tertiary education. It's really important. I think it worked. Oh, there you go. It's working. Okay, great. Now, what are the areas that actually contribute to the growth? Because obviously there are different sectors within the economy. Hopefully all of you can see that. You can see agriculture contributes 0.34%. Fisheries and forestry, please tell me if I'm too fast, because I'm trying to catch up with the time, so we have more time for questions. But let me know if I'm too fast. Fisheries and forestry is 0.01%, which is actually quite low. And obviously that means there are some things that we may need to improve, and obviously that means there's a lot of room for opportunities also. Manufacturing is quite strong. As you can see, that Fiji is a manufacturing hub for the Southern Pacific. Construction again is very, very strong also. You can see a lot of construction going around. At the moment, for example, we have a couple of construction companies that have actually brought in people from Bangladesh, from Philippines, from Indonesia to work on the construction sites. So that is a major challenge for us, but it also means to show that we in fact do not have enough highly qualified tradespeople. And that is quite a significant issue for us. The technical colleges, of course, is there to help fill in that gap. This is why we've got this, we set up 13 technical colleges as to how we can meet this demand through locals actually feeding into those particular professions. So we have, for example, Nadi Airport, those who have been there recently, looks fantastic. The tiles were actually laid by a company from New Zealand / Samoa. We have to use these people because there are no highly skilled tradespeople to be able to carry out the job of that type of magnitude and that level of professionalism. Of course, electricity and water. But this area we are very interested in is services. You can see financial services is contributed 0.45%, which is quite significant. It means to show that Fiji is actually has a lot of potential in that area. We are quite keen about the ITC sector. Those of you who may not know this, but a company called Mindcode, you may have heard of them. They've actually set up a call center. When they came, this is prior to 2014, I think it was around about 2012 or so. When they actually came in order to incentivize them, we gave them a rebate on every single person's salary they paid on a yearly basis. That actually helped them to actually stay in the country. So every time they paid a salary, we actually gave them a rebate at the end of the year. They were able to claim that through Fiji Revenue and Customs Services now. But we asked them, I said, why did we come to Fiji? So they said there are three issues. One of them is that apparently we are in the right time zone, exactly 12 hours behind or ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. So we fit in quite well in some of the other time zones. Secondly was that we have the IT infrastructure. So we have the Southern Cross cable landing in Fiji. So we have the backbone. The challenge now for us, of course, is to ensure that the backbone is further strengthened to make sure that we have stability in that backbone. The third one was apparently that we have neutral accents. Apparently as Fijians, we have neutral accents. They don't have to spend millions of dollars trying to get us to change our accents so some American or British or Australian can understand us. When they set up call centers in India and places like Philippines, they literally spend millions of dollars just for the staff to change the accent so an American can understand it. We apparently don't have very heavy accents, which is something that we did not know about. So, and of course the younger population, because we're English speaking. So these are many of the attractions that we do have. Of course we've got a market like Australia and New Zealand where there's a lot of potential for us in that area. So we are focused in that, but you can see the services sector is growing. From an economic perspective, as a responsible government, we need to ensure that we have growth that's broad-based. If you simply rely on only one or two sectors to contribute to your growth, then you're in deep trouble. So if we, for example, are relying only on tourism and sugar, Cyclone Winston, when it came, it affected yes agriculture, it did damage some sugarcane crops, but predominantly most of the tourism properties were left unscarred. So what that meant, we were able to bounce back really quickly. Can you imagine if 80-90% of all the tourism properties were taken out? Our ability to bounce back would have been much longer. We would probably not be sitting here in this room, we probably would have been in a different space altogether. So we need to mitigate our risks as a responsible government to ensure broad-based growth. In the same way with our tourism sector, it's great, the numbers are growing, but we still have some risks there. The risk is that 51% of our tourism arrivals come from Australia. 16 or 17% come from New Zealand. So nearly 70% of our arrivals come from only two countries. This is why we want more Indians, we want more Chinese, we want more Middle Easterners, we want more Europeans to be able to come and contribute as our source market. So if, for example, we have a 25% spread across say 5 countries, if one country does not economically do well, we are still buoyed by the fact that the other 4 are still contributing the same numbers. So that's what we call mitigating our risks. This is why, for example, we partnered with Fiji Airways to actually fly to Singapore. Now the route is now doing well. We contributed in terms of the partnership, we contributed in the budget about $18 million. That of course will come off soon. The reality now is Fiji Airways, given the traffic throughput now, we're able to now do 3 times a week. It means that the Indian tourists, India is now the largest outbound market In four years' time, it will be the largest outbound market. In fact, it will be the Chinese also in terms of Indians traveling overseas. Now, they also at the moment, even though they have relatively low numbers compared to the other destination tourists, they are the highest spenders per head. On average, the last study that was done, they spend about $67,000 US every 6 days in Fiji, which is very high. So they go to your sort of exclusive resorts, they land in Nadi, take a chopper out to Namale or whatever it is. Those type of sort of destinations. From a tourism perspective, of course, we need to ensure that we have high yields. There's no point having a tourist necessarily increasing the numbers if they're coming in and spending only $1,000. They all use the toilets, they all use your water, they all use your road. We'd rather have less people but higher yield. It's better utilization of your infrastructure also. Oh, sorry. Inflation. Now, this is obviously a critical area for you to look at. Inflation, you can see inflation shot up over here. World price of fuel. We are simply price takers. If the price of fuel goes up tomorrow, we have absolutely no control over it. No control whatsoever. The price of the fuel that you put in your cars will go up. All those areas in Fiji that has electricity generated through diesel generation or generators will go up. We have absolutely no control over it in terms of the world price. But of course, when it lands in Fiji, we have certain price controls that we have put in place. We could template it. So even though you may have price control domestically, internationally you cannot set the price. So that's why the price went up. Of course, world fuel price is not the only thing that contributes to increased inflation. Things like cyclone does. Over here, TC Winston and the floods. A small bunch of bananas after Cyclone Winston, those of you who live in Suva would know it cost you like $20. Yagora still costs $120 a kilo. Some people still drink it at the same rate, even though it used to be about $45 a kilo. But those are the kind of things that actually affect inflation, like cyclone. So you can see it stabilized, come back down to 2%. A bundle of beans used to cost $5, long beans. It's now about $2. It's been hovering around 2% here, and of course Winston went up and it went down and came down here. This of course based on the back of the world oil prices remaining stable. If it increases, it will go up. Foreign reserves. A lot of people don't understand foreign reserves. I'll use the CEO of Tower Insurance as an example. Nearly every single thing that she's wearing on herself that she has is imported. The specs, all of us, the specs, the phone, the shoes, the pen, the bag, the gel you put in your hair, it's all imported. So obviously, to put it simply, this is what I've been explaining to the high school students when we do the budget consultations. When you buy all these things, this mic that I'm holding is all imported. Obviously, they don't sell it to you in Fijian dollars, they sell it to you in Japanese yen, US dollars, Australian dollars, euros. So you need to have enough foreign reserves to be able to trade. Colloquially speaking, a lot of people say when a country does not have enough foreign reserves, then the country is going bankrupt. The international benchmark is that you should have at least 4 months, this is the number of months, at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves to be seen to be generally stable. 2005, we had only $549 million worth of foreign reserves, which equated to about 2.3 months of foreign reserves. Today we have a whopping $2.3 billion worth of foreign reserves, and it's about 5.8 months of trading that we can do with that amount of foreign reserves. You can see over here that even though on nominal terms, the amount here was less than 2.3, it was only 1.7, it said it had 5.8 months worth of trading because of the fact the economy was not as robust as what it is now. So obviously, the more people spend, the more demand there is for foreign goods. It's like I said, most of the things that we do use in our day-to-day lives is actually imported. So notwithstanding the growth, we actually have 5.8 months worth of foreign reserves at $2.3 billion, I should say. Fiscal deficit, put it simply again, I have to remind myself I'm going to a room full of accountants because I've been sort of doing a lot of these consultations with a lot of the students too, so I'll try and put it simply. Essentially, this is the amount of money every year when budget is delivered. We're a post-colonial society. We actually have to invest in things. As I reminded a lot of the people in the West, when you go where CSR used to be, You see all the CSR expatriates, when they all used to live on top of the hill, wherever it was, in Motoka, Bar, and everywhere else. They all had water and electricity, but people around them did not have anything. So you have to rebuild. You have to not rebuild, but you have to actually build. So we have to provide infrastructure. The people in Fiji only a few years ago were drinking from creeks. Some people still do drink from creeks. Some people drink from wells where there are tadpoles in it. Some people don't have electricity until today. The amount of money, as you'll see later on, that has been invested in infrastructure has been significantly high. Exponential growth in the area of the level of investment in infrastructure. So you need to spend, but we spend more than what we collect. So when you spend more than what you collect, you actually have a deficit. So zero, you have surplus. We have a surplus in our, right from the Ratumara government days up till now, we had surplus probably about 3 times only. Sometimes you get a quirky surplus here like that, where perhaps because in that particular year, we may have underspent. Because when you budget, you say we'll spend this much money, you say this much money we'll collect, and therefore if you have a deficit, then it comes out as a deficit which is below the line. So the idea is to make sure that these lines aren't very long. So you can see we've been trying to reduce the deficit here, but it goes up when you have things like cyclones. So Cyclone Winston, we lost about $1.4 billion worth of our GDP, which is nearly about a third, 1.4 billion US. And of course, we have a huge rebuild program. We're spending about $170 to $180 million in just simply rebuilding schools. 95% of all the schools, if not slightly more of the schools that we are rebuilding, did not even have an architectural plan. They did not even have an engineer's plan. So they're still, simply built by various communities or the faith-based organization. When they had some money, they put up a building. But now when we are rebuilding, we actually have consultants, we actually are having an architectural plan, we actually have an engineer's plan. So we're building it better so next time we don't get blown away again, hopefully. So deficit essentially is, you can see what our deficit has been. As an average of fiscal deficit, has been capped at 2.4% since 2007 for GDP, which again is a good space to be. Total government revenue, this is where you are very important, so you help your clients to pay their taxes. The total government revenue is $1.1 billion in 2004. Our revenue has tripled since 2004. We now have a revenue of $3.8 billion. Obviously, if we collect more revenue, we have to borrow less. Basically. If we collect more, we borrow less. We can actually even have a surplus if we want. But the whole idea is to mitigate the risk in terms of borrowing. Now, how have we increased the revenue? Of course, by being stringent in respect of where we are focusing on revenue collection, but also in terms of greater compliance. And accountants actually play a very pivotal role. I've been told some horror stories where recently there's one accounting firm, apparently one of their clients was given some penalties. They had to pay it over a period of time. I think they made some arrangement with FRCS. And then when they're making their monthly installments, that's not something that you can claim, right? The penalties. But the accounting firm decided to be very creative about it and showed it as something that they are purchasing. $1 million over a period of time. My point being, as accountants, you actually have, I believe, a fiduciary duty to your profession to actually do the right thing. You actually have a fiduciary duty to the laws of the country. You should not become the lackey of your clients. Frankly speaking, you need to get them to do the right thing. If there is a taxable amount payable, you need to tell them you need to pay this. You need to move along. And that's where we find there's a lot of issues in that respect, but we hope to get even greater compliance. Of course, some tax growth has contributed by, for example, we now have an overall tax of 25% if you go into certain sectors. So if you stay at a hotel, you pay 9% VAT, you pay 10% ECAL or Environmental Climate Adaptation Levy, and 6% STT, so it's 25%. If you eat at expensive restaurants, etc., you pay the 25%. But if you go down and eat at some of the smaller takeaway places, you don't pay that, you simply pay VAT. We have a lot of still non-compliance issues, a lot of people still trying to scheme the system, but that the revenue has increased threefold. What are the areas that contribute to revenue? So, direct taxes contribute 20.5%, value-added tax contributes 26.1%, customs 19.3%. Still a lot of leakage here. We have some very frank discussions with FRCS. We believe they can do more. We have recently the FRCS staff have been given significant pay rises. One group of people that actually receive probably about a 50% pay raise are the customs people, because there's a lot of corruption too. And of course, the corruption is carried out by people from the private sector, some of them may be your clients. And I have seen some emails which is quite interesting about the kind of exchanges that takes place between people who are bringing goods into the country and how they actually talk to the customs officials. A lot of them actually have a system where if they bring $10 million worth of goods, they'll declare $2 million. The whole thinking is that, well, if you get caught, we'll say, okay, sorry, oops, we'll pay the difference. But actually, that is an infringement of the law, and they need to be punished for that. And they should be punished for that. In fact, I believe people like that should be locked up because it is a criminal offense. People believe that somebody who's stolen your laptop should go to prison. Why shouldn't somebody who's stolen from the state not go to prison also? So we tend to have a very relaxed attitude towards what we call civil-related type matters. The other areas that contribute to revenue collection, water resource tax, departure tax, stamp duty, ECAL. We expect to collect ECAL we expect to collect this financially about $90 million from ECAL. One of the things that we did do with ECAL is that we brought about a new law that was passed during the budget process, was that we decided ourselves that we should actually make ECAL very, very transparent. So it is now legally an obligation on government to publish how ECAL revenue is going to be spent. And more so, ECAL revenue can only be directed towards environmental type matters and climate adaptation matters. So very soon you will see at airports, municipal areas, etc., you get on the website how that $90 million was spent. So if we spend, for example, we can use some of that money to fund the Ministry of Environment. The Ministry of Environment used to be a department, so we now made it a ministry, so that entire funding for that ministry can come from ECAL. But of course, the amount of money we collect from ECAL will be a lot more than what Ministry of Environment needs. We've already moved 3 villages to higher ground because of encroaching coastal waters. There are sugarcane farms, for example, in Vanuatu, that they no longer can plant in those lands because of the salination of the fields, because of salt water creeping in. So you have to build walls, you have to build dikes, etc., all those sorts of things. So the money can be used for that. And there are other things, of course, there. Please feel free to ask me questions. Total government expenditure in these areas, so we will lump together for you very quickly. Infrastructure development, health, education, access to justice, social protection. You can see the amount of money that's increased, gone from $1.3 billion to $4.3 billion. Just very quickly on infrastructure development, those of you, obviously it's quite self-explanatory. We spend a lot of money on roads, bridges, jetties. But we're also trying to build resilience into infrastructure. Traditionally in Fiji, when they build roads, this is the road, they put the water pipe underneath the road. So when the water pipe leaks, we don't know it's leaking. We get a lot of potholes, so everyone says the road is really bad, there's a lot of potholes. Eventually somebody wakes up to the fact that the water pipe is actually leaking. So in order to fix up the water pipe, you dig up the road. So you damage one infrastructure till you fix the other infrastructure. The modern way, of course, building things, then you need to put all the utilities on the side of the road. So if something breaks down there, you fix up, you dig up the side, not dig up the road. A lot of road networks in Fiji actually has water pipes underneath it. This is why you get a lot of breakages in the road, so we have to rebuild. I don't know how many of you have recently been to Nadi. If you go to Nadi, the 4-lane road that's coming out of Nadi Airport, Martinkar, Namaka and all of that. When we were actually doing this and planning for this, there was the option of having overhead cables. If you drive there, you see that there's no overhead cables. It costs about, I think, $20–25 million more to put all the cables underground. So we've done that, because next time there's a cyclone, there's nothing to blow down, it's all underneath. Nearly 6,000 kilometers, Deputy Chair, I think, of electrical cables went down after Cyclone Winston. They obviously put them all back up. Next time there's a cyclone, we go down. Put it back up again, goes down again. So ultimately it becomes a lot more expensive, so you need to put things underground, but it costs money. So we try and target the main trunk routes, if you like, where we need to be able to manage the infrastructure. Health, major issue with health, of course, is that we don't have enough specialists in Fiji. If anyone of us now in this room has a heart attack, you need an open heart surgery, there's no Fijian doctor that can cut you open and play with your heart. Nobody. Which is a tragedy in 21st century Fiji. And the reason why that is because there's been absolutely no investment in human capital in the medical field. Seriously, on a very concerted basis. you cannot do an MBBS and cut you open and play with your heart. You need to have 10, 15 years of training. You need to go overseas. We've got now one doctor, Dr. Giribo, who now does neurological surgery. He's just come back from New Zealand. There's an investment made in him. So we need to be able to do that. In the meantime, of course, we have to get specialists from overseas. They don't necessarily come cheap. If you say to a specialist, we want to send you to Lambasa, they'll ask, what's the size of Lambasa town? Is there international school there? Where can I send my children to school? What's the nightlife like? If someone is coming from downtown Mumbai, they're very used to a lot of social amenities and services and entertainment. It is not necessarily very attractive to get people to Fiji from that perspective. So these are some of the challenges we are facing now, and it will take some time for us to build that HR capacity. In the meantime, we need to be able to do some creative, policies in place, and we have got some announcements to make in that respect very soon. Education, of course, we've made education free up to high school. We now have TELs, we have scholarships based not on ethnicity or religion, etc., but purely based on merit. The number of times I've been told by people, we wish we had TELs when I was in high school. I left high school because my father could not afford to send me to school. I used to come first, but now I'm a mechanic. Or I wish it was there when I was educating my children. I could have got them to finish school. In fact, if you look at it, sociologically, whenever you have 5 or 6 kids and you have to pay for the fees, generally the women stayed back, the girls stayed back home because the boys had to get educated. The girls actually, of course, one day will get married and be with their husbands in any case, so no point getting them educated if you have to make the choice. So these are, of course, some of the effects of bringing about, free education, etc. Access to justice. This is predominantly legal aid. Now it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we have legal aid available to all Fijians, in particular people below a particular income level. We also now get them to draft wills, do probates, etc. Most people think that drafting of wills is only for people who are wealthy, not for people who are necessarily lower income levels. So they do provide that. Maternity cases, paternity cases, maintenance cases, all of those things. We now have legal aid offices in Ovalau, in Kandavu, in Tabuini, in Rotuma, and various other places. Places like Nabuwalu. So we're in fact expanding the services. Legal aid now is the largest, what I call the largest law firm in Fiji. There are, I think, something like about 40 or 50 lawyers that legal aid has. Social protection, these are things for people on social welfare. For the first time, as announced in the budget, we now have people who are disabled for the first time with a specific welfare payment for them. We started a program a few years ago where rural pregnant women now get food vouchers from us because we need these women to eat properly. If they don't eat properly when they're pregnant, they don't deliver well, they can get sick themselves, or the babies that they deliver are malnutrition or have suffered from malnutrition. So it puts a burden on the health system if you look at it purely from a numbers perspective, as you all accountants. So that's the way, that's the program brought about. We've increased the food voucher amounts. We also introduced something that was new. There was many people in Fiji, a lot of people don't realize this, that the conservative figures that at least 130,000 Fijians do not actually work for anybody. They're in the informal sector. People sell vegetables by the roadside, people sell coconuts to you, people sell fish. A lot of women in Fiji have never worked for anybody. So therefore, as a result, they don't have FNPF. So when they get old, they don't have any pension. So there's no form of protection for them. You'll be surprised with the social changes that are taking place in our country, how many people no longer look after their parents as traditionally expected. So a lot of older people are now sort of abandoned, or children have migrated or whatever, migrated to Sydney, migrated to Suva, whatever the case may be. So we started a scheme that those people of the age of 70 years who would never receive FNPF, we started getting $30 a month, went up to 50, we reduced the age to 68 as announced in the budget. We now pegged the age to 65 and they get $100 a month. Obviously they need those type of access to resources. Very important, expenditure mix, you know about this, you're all accountants. The two types of expenditures, you have operating expenditure and your capital expenditure. For government, this is very, very important. As I said to the students, is that, if we all decide to have, I'll use that example later on, but capital expenditure, as you can see, in 2004, for example, the amount of money that was spent in the budget by the government, 83% went into operating expenditure, only 17% went into capital. And you can see the progression of this. We have a target to increase the proportion of capital expenditure being a lot higher. Because in particular when you're borrowing, you need to be able to spend to build. So you got something to show for it. The example is with the high school students was that if you all decide to have a party at McDonald's and you don't have any money, you go to the bank manager of ANZ or Westpac in this particular case, and they give you a loan. You can have the party at McDonald's, finish the burger and the drinks, you wake up in the morning, it's all gone, but the debt is still there, you got nothing to show for it. If you actually borrow to build, then you got something to show for it, the debt will be there, after a while the debt will be gone, but you still got an asset. So it is very important for every government to ensure that this round line is actually quite significant. And I think we've done quite well in that respect, if you can see the proportion of operating versus capital in that respect. So as I said, when we put that 4-lane road in Nandi, there's no longer a need to build a 4-lane road for the next 15 years maybe. 15, 20 years. We don't need to put a 4-lane road. The upgrade of the waterworks, there's no longer any need to do that for the next 20, 30 years. So there's not that much of a burden for the future if you're building now. Of course, if you build a road now, it's a lot cheaper to build it now than to build it in 10 years' time. It costs a lot more. Funding for roads and bridges, good old PWD days. You can see what the difference is now, 10 goals in 2004. I think it speaks for itself, but you can ask me to question that. Again, water and energy, very significant. $360 million. That also includes electricity subsidies announced in the budget. So households that earn less than $30,000 a year, we actually subsidize the electricity cost. The electricity cost, unit cost of this is 34 cents a unit for households. We pay 50% of that if your household earns less than $30,000 a year. Prior to this budget announcement, you had to use 95 kilowatts or less. If you use 96, we would not give you a single cent. But as announced in this budget, now it's up to 100, but even if you use more than 100, you still get it. So any household that earns less than $30,000 a year, we will subsidize your electricity up to 100 kilowatts, 50% of the electricity cost. That's obviously to give them that sort of assistance. Similarly with water, households earning less than $30,000 a year, World Health Organization says that you and I as individual human beings need 50 liters of water a day. To go to the toilet, to wash yourself, to cook, to bathe, whatever it is. So, based on that, and 5 persons per household, let's calculate that is over 90,000 liters of water free a year. So if you earn less than that, that's how much free water you also get. Water is not in Fiji, but we have a massive rural electrification and grid extension program. The idea is also to ensure that you increase the productive capacity of your country. The example that I've used is that you drive along the highway, etc. You see people selling fresh fish by the roadside. If they aren't able to sell the fresh fish by the afternoon, they will bring down the price of the fish because they have no way to store the fish. They don't have access to electricity. If they can't sell the fish, they either eat it themselves, they're probably sick and tired of eating it every day, or they give it to somebody, or it rots. The moment you connect them with electricity, they won't bring down the price because they know they can store it. The next day they'll pull it out of the cooler, they'll throw water on it, you drive along saying fresh fish for sale. But it's still the same price. So you suddenly increase their income levels. Very basic things like that. So there was a requirement previously, if you wanted to be part of the grid, you actually had to contribute. Each household had to contribute 10%. Then it went down to 5%. We now no longer require, as the deputy chair of FEA will tell you. So, for example, I assume all these people live in the area, they all want to be connected to electricity. They'll say you all have to pay $500 each or $2,000 each. Maybe 1/3 of them will contribute, the others won't contribute, it still sits there. Some of the project has been sitting there for 5 years, 7 years, simply because the others have not contributed. But we did a couple of budgets ago, we returned all the money, and then we now put them on the list, so everybody comes on a first served basis. Funding for education, you can see, is plodding along at, in around about 300 million, goes up from 351 to 520, that's where free education came in. So all the way up to year 13. Of course, since then we've improved now early childhood education. We paid for the teachers too. Before, EC teachers did not get that level of funding. We've also increased funding for TELS and also the toppers. That's increased quite significantly. And of course, that includes the $170 million school rebuild. Again, doctors gone up significantly. Doctors received 80% pay rise about 2 years ago. Most of the top tier doctors. We're looking at another review for them also. Free medicine program recruitment. Every year, we've been creating almost on average about 200 to 250 new positions for teachers in particular, and new positions, and also for nurses. Nurse numbers we've been increasing, also doctors. What I mentioned earlier on, this is our total operating revenue, top of the blue all the way down to the bottom. So every single operating expenditure of ours now in Fiji, we actually pay from our operating revenue. My salary, the vehicle that I came in, the hotels we stay in, the toilet paper, the photocopy paper, whatever the case is, we actually pay from our operating revenue. And we have a surplus, which is a good space to be in. So we have a surplus of about $896 million, which means essentially we have to borrow less. The other thing that, sorry, I forgot to mention, when I mentioned about foreign reserves, a lot of countries do look at that when we do, borrowings offshore. They look at your foreign reserves. So, for example, Fiji Airways, when they bought those brand new A330s, of course they got some funding from FMPF, but the bulk of that funding came from European banks. So one of the first things they look at is essentially your foreign reserves. If your foreign reserves are good, you actually are able to get good interest rates also. You're able to get more lending and attractive rates. Government debt. A lot of people talk about debt without necessarily understanding debt. The line that I say to people to watch is this line here. This is the nominal amount of your debt. So if you can see, for example, again, if I can use a high school student example, is that assuming our GDP growth is $100, and we go out and borrow $20, then you say a debt to GDP ratio is 20%. But assuming your GDP increases to $500 or your wealth increases to $500, and you go out and borrow $50, 2.5 times more than what you originally did. In nominal terms, your debt level has increased from 20 to 50. As a percentage of your GDP, it's gone down to 10%. So the more capacity you have in your GDP, the more ability you have to be able to borrow. You can see that's very interesting because if you see in 2006, the total debt exposure in nominal terms is $2.8 billion. These are Fijian dollars we're talking about. The debt to GDP ratio is 53.3. Today the debt level is $5.2 billion, but it's 47.5. So even though in nominal terms it's gone up, but as a percentage of GDP it's decreased, sorry. Over here we're actually coming down, that's sort of our policy, but it has a slight dip up here because of Cyclone Winston. We had to go out and borrow money in the market in excess of $200 million. We pushed up the nominal amount, of course, but also more so it is a percentage of your GDP. By comparison, what do the other countries look like? Japan is a fantastic 239.2% debt to GDP ratio. But, behold, it's got a AAA rating. AAA rating. Singapore, percent of GDP 112%. Nominal terms, $332.7 billion. This is US. Japan, of course, $11.8 trillion. USA, 107.4%, $19.9 trillion. Canada, somebody mentioned in Parliament that we should follow Canada, and I said, do you know what's the debt to GDP ratio? They obviously didn't know that. They also have AAA ratings. This is some of the anomalies in the international ratings that you have. But none of you will ever say Canada is in dire straits, or Japan is in dire straits, or USA in dire straits. Everybody thinks that Fiji is in dire straits. Maldives, again, 81.5%. $2.75 billion. These are some more comparable countries, Seychelles. Now, Mauritius is a very interesting country. I was there, I'm fortunate enough to be there for about a day and a half earlier this year. Mauritius is very similar to Fiji, where their GDP value was actually far less than Fiji in the 1960s. They're actually quite smart, they did a lot of smart things. They're also very heavily dependent on sugar. Today, however, the sugar industry in Mauritius, all the sugarcane farms, is owned by only 6 companies. In Fiji, we have small farmer holdings. They have only 6 companies that own all the sugarcane plantations. A lot of the sugarcane companies have actually ventured out into other areas of the economy. But they decided, say, what are we going to do, once the sugar thing goes off the dial? So they're actually quite well placed in terms of they're relatively close to Africa. I think they're about 3.5 hours or 4 hours away from Africa. Very large continent, lots of people, very young people there also. So what they did, they invested very heavily in doing 4-lane roads, all sorts of things. In fact, Mauritius does not even have a proper river. They've got a dam to collect all the national water requirements. They put up an IT park. They went down to India. They brought in 3 Indian hospitals to set up, first-class medical facilities. Then they said to all the international companies, come and be based in Mauritius to serve Africa. In fact, they've done that. A lot of the international companies, bulk of them are based in Mauritius to actually serve Africa. So they've got law and order situation is good, safe, infrastructure works, did not work very well before, now it works. And they've been able to position themselves. So in fact, they accumulated a lot of debt. Their debt, if you see, actually, is about $7.5 billion US dollars. Ours is $2.35 billion US dollars. But that debt is debt well spent in the sense because it's increasing the productive capacity. So they say to Africans, come and get your open heart surgery in Mauritius. Don't go all the way to Europe. Don't go all the way to India. We'll do it for you. So when they come, they get the open heart surgery, maybe they get the breast implant, whatever it is. And then you go to the beach and you relax. And you suntan, whatever you need to suntan. That's how the system works. That's what we call medical tourism. So they're able to leverage of their geographical location. We are doing that, obviously. We have started doing that. And we need people like you to understand what is actually happening, why there is this investment being made. We have just recently borrowed in this budget, as you can see, about $9 million from the World Bank. Because, as I mentioned earlier on, the Southern Cross Cable, the submarine cable that connects Australia to the west coast of North America, passes through Fiji, it lands in Botswana. All the other Pacific Island countries that actually want to connect to the Southern Cross Cable has to connect to Botswana. So Samoa is actually building a cable from Samoa to come between, it has to come between Taveuni and Vanuatu. Coming in between them to connect to Botswana. So we said, this is an opportunity for us. So we're building a pipe out of that cable to land in Vanuatu. Once that is connected, the internet speed in Vanuatu will increase 100%. Now what does that mean? It means there's opportunities for IT companies to be based in Vanuatu. We want people in Vanuatu to stay there also. And some of you to go there too. Because we have a problem. Rural-urban drift. A lot of the people who are squatters come from there. When 50% of when majority of the leases in Vanuatu weren't renewed, courtesy of some people, after 1999, sugarcane production in Vanuatu went down by 50%, which means the economies weren't there for people to actually stay and get a decent living. So they'll come to the big smoke. In order for us to be able to ensure that we have that type of productive capacity in those places, it needs to have the level of infrastructure. You'll see we're doing rural street lighting, those of you may have seen. You go to Korovuto, you go to various other places, now you've got street lights at night. Why are we doing that? A couple of reasons. One of them, of course, is that people feel safe to walk at night. Women can go freely off to the shop without being, the fear of being hassled. Those people who sell barbecue, who sell corn, hot sila as they say, along the roadside, they can now trade at night. People who sell vegetables and achar and chutneys over there, they can sell at night. It increases the times in which they can trade. And of course, it also means that those people who want to build homes can live there also and feel like they have the amenities of the town, of the city. So the land cost there is far less than trying to build a house in London. So at least they can build their own home and travel to work from Korovuto or wherever it is, or beyond Korovuto even. It's not that far, the roads are good, we have electricity, we have street lighting. So we're actually increasing the economic opportunities of people also. So that's how it works. So that's the debt situation. I mean, again, like for example, just to put it into context, if you look at a country like Australia, as a percentage of GDP is 41.1% of the GDP, debt to GDP ratio, but in nominal terms it's $517.3 billion US. So sometimes a percentage of a GDP it may be lower than what we have, but in nominal terms it's a lot higher. Okay, I hope you can ask a question if you want to know more about that. This is just some tables we had. Major policy revenue, okay? Take this in the 2017-2018 budget. Income tax threshold, as you know, is increased from $16,000 to $30,000, which also means all of you have got a tax cut also. Because the way the tax system works is not just those people who are up to $30,000, it has a consequential flow, as you know. So you all have a tax cut, and hopefully you all spend that money very wisely. Dividend tax, as you know, we've got rid of dividend tax altogether, but there's a transitional provision there of 1%. SRT has been, the permutation has changed, however, net effect is 0. So essentially now, part of the SRT, you have ECAL. Fringe benefit tax in respect of health insurance benefits, electric charging stations, we've reduced now, if you invest now $500,000, you will get the various benefits in respect of that. ECAL, again, that's been put in place. We have as part of that, those who are into super yachts, we've reduced it from 12.5% to 10% simple ECAL. Tourists don't mind paying ECAL. They feel like they're contributing to the environment. So, it's a lot easier of a tax to be able to sell. So the charter fees that we used to have, we've reduced it. We've got rid of the charter fees. We've now simply imposed the 10% ECAL. Again, we have ECAL on luxury vehicles, etc. STT, to have a zero net effect in terms of the overall tax, reduce STT from 10% to 6%. Again, FERCA or FRCS, or somebody said to me, FIRST needs to make sure that everybody complies with this. So now your receipts needs to actually show what is the component of STT, what is the component of ECAL, what is the component of VAT. That's something your clients, who actually have this applicable to them, need to ensure that they actually have that shown on their receipts. The other requirement, of course, is sometimes you go to hotels, they don't actually set out what the tax is. So when in the menu the price is there, then you go there, there's suddenly it jumps up by 25%. So as a consumer, you should be able to know when you see the menu, the price on the menu, it must be inclusive of tax, all the taxes, just to create more transparency. And of course, one of the areas that I do have to say that I think in the tourism sector, some of the properties are really outpricing Fiji. Curry chicken costs $70 in Denver and some of the resorts. This is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. A bowl of fries costs $20, $25. This is even before tax. Nothing to do with tax. Ice cream. 2 cones of ice cream, not cones here. 2 scoops of ice cream is $15. The consumers are a lot more discerning now. The Aussies and the Kiwis and others actually look at those things too. If I've got a family of 5 people, why would I want to go somewhere and pay? If I can't buy a bowl of fries just for one child, I buy for 5 of them. Suddenly I want to pocket by about $120 just for some fries. So, we need to be able to get the tourism sector to also understand that. There have been extension of the tax incentive. Of course, Berger will talk a lot about this if you have any questions in terms of the tax-free region incentive, commercial agriculture, agro-processing. Amnesty again, the declaration of foreign assets. If you have clients who do that, please tell them to declare the assets. The last time we gave amnesty, something about $500 million worth of assets were declared. We know that's just the tip of the iceberg. Just the tip of the iceberg. A lot more. Some people we know, they have about probably more than 10 or 12 properties. They probably declared only 2 in the hope that we won't go after them again. Won't do the audit quiz. We are actually very serious about it now. We've set up an economic intelligence unit in the Ministry, in the process of setting it up, I should say, but we announced in the budget in the Ministry of Economy. We've given certain new powers to the Fijian Competition and Commerce Commission. That's more to do with domestically. We are told that about 60 to 65% of all the goods that you see in supermarkets are in fact imported by only 5 or 6 wholesalers. They have exclusivity over many brands. So irrespective of the fact that for many of these products over the past few years, we've zero-rated duty on these products, that has not translated into a reduction in the cost of those goods when you go and buy it. Because the wholesalers are the ones who are making the killing. So you may sometimes blame a retailer, who may be selling something to you for $9, but in fact it's probably being sold to him or her at $7.50 or $8. The person who's bringing the country is landing at about $2.50, making a huge killing on that. So we need to be able, we've given the Commerce Commission their powers, they've worked with us too, and also they've got a MOU with FIS to actually go out and look behind the scenes in respect of that. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that from a business, from a long-term sustainability perspective, businesses in Fiji need to focus on volume. The story that I like telling is that a few years ago, 2011, 12 or so, I walked into a shop in Nandi, and there was a bowler shirt, very nice bowler shirt on display. And I said to him, I said, how much? He said, boss, for you $20. The price tag marked on it was $65. Then another fellow Fijian walked in. He said, how much? He said, $25 to me. Obviously selling for $20 because I'm a minister, but he's still making a margin with me. The other person who's not a minister, he's selling to me for $25, he's obviously making a margin for him. I said, why have you marked it 65? I said, that's the tourist price. So I said to him, I said, look, you're obviously making a margin at $25. So if you sold it at $25, the tourist walking in will say, great price, please give me 3 pieces. That's what I do when I go overseas. Certain things in Fiji are not that, expensive or inexpensive. Like, for example, chocolates. So when I go overseas and I see some cheap chocolates, I suddenly think of all my relatives and my wife's relatives. And how the suitcase is filled up with it. So it's volume based because it's, inexpensive. And thankfully now, if you go down Nandi now, there's not much differentiation between tourists and locals. If you buy, those fake polo t-shirts, it's $19 for everybody. You get it for $19, the tourist gets it for $19. The volume will increase. It's in the same way, for example, we keep on saying, there is a thinking. We zero-rated a duty on cereals a few years ago. But the price of cereals actually did not come down. Now, because most of these people think that cereals are generally eaten by wealthy people so they can afford it. So the markup is still very high, even by the wholesalers. They think that most of the people eat bread and tea and cassava and black tea, whatever, in the morning. So social circumstances have changed. They don't do that. People don't have access to those goods. So we need to ensure that the businesses, your clients, actually think along those lines also. That if you are able to sell it at relatively competitive prices, you'll find more people buying it. Outboard motor engines in Fiji are zero-rated a few years ago. The markup you've seen on outboard motor engines goes up to about 85%. It's ridiculous. So you still have people living in the outer islands. They have these outboard motor engines, they push it, it breaks down. They are able to, their productive capacity goes down. If the outboard motor engines were actually priced well, they'll replace it. So people selling the outboard motor engines will actually get a high volume turnover in respect of the sales that they'll do. So these are some of the things when you think about it, your clients actually need to think about also. As we said that there's general amnesty in respect of people who have small businesses. Turnover less than $1.5 million, we're doing an amnesty period until 31 December 2017, some of our clients may sit in that. As you said, FIRCA's has had a name change to make it more service orientated. We talked about the construction industry. A number of the products in the construction industry actually will reduce the duty to actually help in the construction industry. Things like, fabricators, steel structures, scaffolding, shelving, rackings, vinyl sheet plying. These things are very important over here. This vinyl sheet plying is used for actually building walls, sea-walls, very good material for that. All the other stuff, things used for tiling, polishers, creams, sealers, and all of that. This is very interesting what we've done with the public service, public service vehicles sector. Before this announcement, if you are owner of a taxi permit, your taxi permit is for 3 years only. You have to get it renewed every 3 years. Some of you may be owners of taxi permits, I do not know. You may have clients who are owners of taxi permits. But when you go to the bank to get a loan, the banks will actually give you a loan, normally a car loan is 5 years. Why would I, as a taxi owner with a permit of 3 years, get a loan for 5 years, knowing that there's a possibility of me not getting a permit extension? So I have a debt exposure. So what we've done, we said from the 1st of October of this year, all taxi permit holders will get the permit automatically extended for 10 years. The 10 years starts on the 1st of October. We should then see a particular level of confidence. Now there's a couple other things we've done with that. That taxi permit that you do hold then, you can actually sell it to whoever you like. As long as that person is not a terrorist or undischarged bankrupt. LTA cannot interfere with that. I can sell it, so I can come along and say to Sunil, I've got a taxi permit, you want to buy it, give me 50 grand, I'll sell it to you, you can buy it from me. Instantly, all those holders of those taxi permits have created an asset for them. Now, assuming they don't want to sell it, but they go to the bank. When they do go to the bank, get a loan, they can now use those permits as collateral. It's an asset that they can use as collateral. And the bank should bring down the interest rate also. We've also made an arrangement with the Reserve Bank of Fiji, who will now lend to the commercial banks at 1%. And so if I'm a taxi permit holder of less than three permits, or 3 cars, I can then get a loan for no more than 5% interest rate to incentivize people to buy new vehicles, because we want to change, we want to bring new technology as far as vehicles are concerned to reduce also our carbon footprint. One major issue, of course, is those omnibuses, the big buses, what do you call the buses, the big buses, omnibuses they're called, legally speaking. Those omnibuses will now get a 15-year permit. They also have similar things. So a bus company that has a gross turnover, of less than $1.5 million will also get a 5% interest rate or less. They'll also, if they import any new buses, they will pay 0% interest, 0% duty. Now, the example that I used, I don't know what's the story with the accountants, but I know with the lawyers at the HG's office, those of them who wear the suits, you'll never see them catch a bus. They'll take the taxi. How many people do you see people in Fiji wearing a suit taking a public bus? Few, if not none. But those same people are quite happy to take the bus in Sydney, quite happy to take the train in Sydney, or catch the ferry in Sydney. Not looked down upon. So what do we have to do? We have to make the buses more attractive. As I said somewhere, make the buses more sexy. There are still buses in Fiji with the windows are tarpaulins. Right? So do you expect this person in a suit to catch a bus that's got tarpaulin in it? We are building a 4-lane road all the way from Suva to Nosori. Nearly 300,000 people live between Nosori and Lemi. To travel from Nakasi, peak period can take you over 1 hour 20 minutes, 1.5 hours, sometimes 1 hour. And if you look at all those vehicles, you're just going to sit there in the peak hour period. Most of the people in the vehicles is only one person. So if we want more people to take public transportation, we need to make the buses actually up to a particular standard. With the 4-laning of the road, we can in a couple of years' time have dedicated bus lanes between a particular time period. So you can say from 6:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. this bus lane will be exclusively for buses. As they do it in Sydney, for example, exclusive bus lanes. So you get to work on time really quickly. That's what we need to do to improve the productive time you spend in terms of working as opposed to spending it on the road, because when you're in the car driving behind the wheel, you're actually not very productive. Similarly, our carbon footprint increases because the engine is on. It's burning more fuel. So we are putting in place a number of these measures now so we can actually do a number of things in the future. Many of these announcements we actually decided about 3 years ago. But we actually had to be in the right economic space to be able to do that. So the point being, when we do develop these budgets, good governments will also plan ahead. You can't simply do it from year to year. So there needs to be consistency in policies. Similarly, we have, for example, inter-island shipping now, with zero-rated. If you want to import a ship, zero-rated duty. When you want to get spare parts, it's zero-rated duty also, because we need more inter-island shipping. New parts for motor vehicles, reduce the duty, the engines, hybrid cells, energy bars, sardines. This is again, those kind of food items that we need to make it more attractive. As I said, 69.4% of the population is below the age of 40. People tend to be a lot more productive when they're below 40. They have to have a lot of babies. So a couple of years ago, we reduced the duty on a number of baby items. We now, a couple of areas we had missed out, so we reduced the duty. For example, baby wipes, essential, 0. But things like baby shoes, baby cots has been reduced. Johnson & Johnson, for example, when we reduced the duty in maize products, the sole agency of Johnson & Johnson is held by one company only. For Fiji and also for the entire Southern Pacific, I understand. But the price of Johnson & Johnson has not come down. So again, the Commerce Commission is going to go behind the scenes. I was informed that the person at the agency said, if I reduce my price here, what will I do in Tonga? So this is not our business. We're not concerned about Tonga, we're concerned about Fiji. So these are some of the, the dynamics behind the scenes, so to speak. Again, I mean, this is again to help the tourism sector, the diving industry, we reduced duty for gloves, wetsuits, and all of that. I don't know how much detail you want to go into. Again, this is to complete some of the initiatives. For example, with the music industry, musical instruments, all those types of things, and amplifiers, we reduce the duty just to complete that. So microphones, speakers, and all that. Toweling fabric, you can buy towels in Fiji. You wipe your body with the towel, the water stays there, but the towel still slides off. Some quality goods we are getting. So we've reduced the duty on things like toweling fabric to actually help with that. Ready-made towels also reduce the duty. So again, to help people to be able to do very basic things in life that people don't generally enjoy. Like, we reduced the duty on undergarments a few years ago. You would believe people actually objected to that. There's other things. I mean, we had goods imported for international meetings. There's, first sometimes get a bit over enthusiastic about things like this, so just to make the law clearer, put that in place. Of course, the sin goods, they traditionally go up, including sweetened and carbonated drinks. All of this information, ladies and gentlemen, is available on this website. You can get everything from there, even the budget estimate, which unfortunately I did not bring. But this is a big, thick book that tells you about every single ministry and every single department within that ministry, how much money that they're spending. We did this last year, we started this last year, budget flyers. For each ministry, we've done a breakdown of the major expenditures, but one interesting thing we also did last year is, if you go to the flyer on, for example, rural electrification, you'll see exactly which area is getting the grid extension. Then you'll see which area is actually being connected. So you say Ram Prasad and 10 others. Cost is $500,000, they'll be connected this year. Or this particular village is being connected this year. You see everything being broken down. You'll actually see Water Authority Fiji, which area is getting how many water tanks and what's the size of the water tanks. All of that is there, so you can track it. If you know people in those areas, you can also see whether it's actually being delivered or not, and of course, all the other information is there. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's actually the budget in a nutshell and the dynamics behind it. What I wanted to say, and at least whilst I've got this opportunity to please understand that if we are able to collect the right level of revenue and you get your clients to actually pay the revenue, we have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the Southern Hemisphere, I'll venture to say. But with the right level of infrastructure, and input in the infrastructure, we are of course not a tax haven like Vanuatu, etc. But in terms of countries that do pay taxes, it's 20%. Now it's actually real tax, 20%. We no longer have actually dividend tax. So, and also if you list it at South African Stock Exchange, it's only 10%. The lowest rates in terms of personal income taxes we also have, it's very low. However, we've been able to reach a level of equilibrium that has seen the economy actually grow. Initially it's consumer driven, now we're seeing actually it's being investment driven, which is a good space to be in also. The momentum of this needs to continue. Now, one of the ways it will continue, apart from some of the other things that I've said, is obviously that people need to pay the right taxes. You need to be able to ensure that everybody follows the law. I believe that you all have a fiduciary duty. I'm talking to a group of lawyers on Friday too. They also have a fiduciary duty similarly to you. Please put the interest of the law ahead of the interest of anything else. That's very important. If we're able to collect the right revenue, and everybody should make money, everybody should make lots of profits. We want you to do that because the more profits people make, your clients make, they'll invest that. Or they'll spend it, which is great. We want that. We need that level of robustness within the economy. But if everybody contributes towards that, the revenue of government will increase. If the revenue of government increases, we'll be able to do a lot more creative things. We'll be able to do, for example, things like civil service reforms. I'm sure a lot of you aren't necessarily happy with some elements of government services. We want to be able to improve that. We can actually invest in more technology in government services. We're able to now give all the civil servants a pay rise, which actually gives us the ability to then say to civil servants, if you don't perform based on the contracts, if you are not doing the right thing, you will actually not necessarily have your contracts renewed. Similarly, if we're able to attract better quality people, we want some of you, maybe persons who can contribute a lot better to the civil service. We want you to apply for those jobs too. So we want people from the outside to also apply for those positions. So overall, it's in everybody's interest to be able to comply with the law. If you comply with the law, the overall economic output of the country will increase. The businesses are able to actually also understand that if they do the right thing, if they actually have a volume-based approach, then obviously their businesses, in terms of sustainability and durability, will actually do a lot better. There's still many people in Fiji who recycle things, whether it's outboard motor engines. Some people recycle nails to build their homes, nails. Now that is not a good space to be in. So if we are able to think nationally in that respect, then the economy will do well, and we have a very pivotal role in that respect. There are a lot of anomalies. I think there are a lot of people who don't necessarily understand a lot of things, the changes that are taking place. In the case of Kuwait, for example, I believe the Auditor General's office is not necessarily up to speed with the many changes that are taking place state-owned enterprises. They don't necessarily understand business per se. So, for example, at the moment we are looking at divesting some of our shares in FEA. We've already divested some of our shares in Fiji Ports Corporation Limited. By getting 18 Spence on board, we have increased the turnaround time, improved it, by 33% within the span of 4 months. Previously, when ships used to come to Fiji, they would charge an additional levy because the turnaround times at the port were so slow. It cost them a lot of money to bring the ships to Fiji, just to offload and onload. Now they've removed that levy. So we need to be able to get good management systems in place. We need to be able to get more smarter and creative and innovators into that public space of thinking, and you can contribute towards that. So just with those few words, I'd like to round off, and I'm quite happy